good day today and that you're all cuddled up under the covers. Tonight's story is The Girl Who Loved to Paint, written by Jasmine Jewell-Washington. There were shades of magenta and splashes of blue, colors merging together to create something beautiful and new. Isabella's eyes filled with a reflection of a rainbow. As she looked down at the color palette before her, it seemed to glow. Suddenly, Isabella felt a familiar tug at her dress. She smiled warmly to herself and said, what could that be? Let me guess. She looked down and to no surprise, it was her dog Freckles. She kneeled down to meet his face. His nose tickled her cheek and she let out a chuckle. Isabella walked over to her easel with Freckles following behind. He watched as her brush stroked against the canvas, line by line. "Well, what do you think?" asked Isabella as Freckles returned a look of confusion. Isabella let out a giggle and said, "That's you, silly, my best friend." "Hey, sweetie," Isabella's mom said cheerfully. As she entered the room, Isabella greeted her with a hug. She walked over to Isabella's desk. She looked at each painting amazed with eyes full of love. They sat down side by side. On the table, Isabella placed a few cups of paint and 2 paintbrushes. Her mom looked at her sternly and said, "You have to show your work tomorrow in art class. It is truly miraculous." "Okay," Isabella said reluctantly. "I promise I will this time." "What about this one?" asked her mom as she brought over one of the paintings from the shelf. Isabella shrugged and responded shyly, "Well, it is a favorite of mine." Isabella's mom smiled warmly and replied, "I believe in you, and you should too." Isabella leaned in, hugged her mom tightly, and said, "Thank you, Mom. I love you." The next day, Isabella was the first one in class. Each of her classmates went up one by one. Sharing each other's work with one another was so much fun. "That looks silly!" one of her classmates shouted, and laughter filled the air. Isabella ran out of the classroom and said to herself, "This was an awful idea. I should have never shared." Later on that day, Isabella sat outside of her house, feeling upset and sad. A day that had started off so good had become so terribly bad. Isabella looked up towards the sound of a door closing. Her mom walked over and kneeled down beside her. On her face, a weary smile was showing. "I heard what happened in class today," her mom said. Suddenly, Isabella felt as though a frog was going to leap from her throat. Her mom frowned and placed her hand on Isabella's head. Her mom spoke softly. "It takes courage to be different when everyone is the same. You see, without people like you, the world would be plain." Isabella wrapped her arms around her mom and couldn't help but grin. She realized in that moment that some losses are actually a win. Later that night, Isabella was laying in bed wide awake. She looked out of her window at the beautiful sky and she decided to paint. "But what if no one likes it?" she said to herself. She thought about what happened earlier and didn't like how that felt. She looked over at her painting of the stars and said, "It takes courage to be different, but where do I start? I must do what my mom said and follow my heart." In the corner of her room, Isabella noticed something glowing. What is that?" she stuttered. But she reached for it anyway, even without knowing. As she held it in her hand, she couldn't believe her eyes. It was a glowing paintbrush. Inside, she felt her imagination come alive. "I can't wait to use this tomorrow," Isabella whispered as she climbed into bed. She thought of all the wonderful things she would create. "I hope this isn't just a dream," she said. The next day, Isabella was in her art room for hours. She filled canvas after canvas, painting everything from dinosaurs to giraffes and purple flowers. "It's not working," she exclaimed, then let out a sigh. The paintbrush's glow did not return, but she didn't know why. She reached down to place her paintbrush on the canvas, but it slipped from her hand. As it fell to the floor, dog food emerged in a can. Isabella let out a gasp. "I can't believe it!" Isabella shouted. She now understood that she could create whatever she wanted. She filled Freckles' bowl with his food. "We are going to need more paint," she said, her words filled with excitement. Freckles licked the bowl clean and off they went. At the store, Isabella picked up every shade of paint she could find. Her basket was heavy as she raced to the checkout line. Afterwards, Isabella and Freckles walked to the farthest part of the forest, where no one could see. They were surrounded by so many tall trees and flowers that flourished at their feet. "Where have all the animals gone?" Isabella asked, frowning. So many buildings were in the distance, but no squirrels, deers, or rabbits were in their surroundings. Isabella climbed a tree and began to paint. On the branch, a bird nest appeared. Before she knew it, there were birds everywhere. Isabella smiled and climbed down from the tree. Watching the birds take flight was an amazing sight to see. She thought about what she should paint next. "It is very hot today," she said, and she began to paint clouds in the sky above her head. Isabella looked over at Freckles. "I think that's enough for today," she said proudly as she looked around at what she'd done and was happy as she could be. When Isabella got home, her mom was waiting for her in the living room. Her head was down and her face was filled with gloom. "What's wrong, Mom?" Isabella asked. "The drought has gotten worse," her mom continued, "and we're not sure how long it will last." "Oh no," Isabella said sadly and sighed. "The river has dried up, so we don't have any more water," her mom replied. "I have to think of something fast," Isabella thought. She had another idea for all of the paint she just bought. She jumped up and ran toward the door. "Where are you going?" her mom asked. "Just trust me," she replied, and left in a flash. Outside, Isabella filled a bucket with blue paint. Freckles followed behind. "I'm sorry, buddy," she continued. "You can't come with me this time." "I'll be right back," she promised and gave him a hug. She had gotten her special paintbrush for a reason, and she finally knew what it was. Isabella ran up and down the empty river, covering in splashes of paint that seemed to shimmer. Drops of water emerged from the brush, creating the most beautiful glimmer. She didn't know if her plan would work. She could only hope, but she didn't give up, and to her surprise, water began to flow. Everyone in town began to gather around, and Isabella walked over to join them. They looked on and cheered as they discovered what she had done. Isabella's mom followed the noise and saw her daughter standing in the middle of the crowd. She joined her and said happily, "I am so proud." While smiling, her mom said, "I believed in you from the start," she continued. "You know what it means to be brave, but more importantly, to have a good heart." Everyone began to shout, "Hip, hip, hooray!" Isabella realized because she had the courage to be herself, she had saved the day. As Isabella hugged her mom, she remembered her words. She learned that everyone has a superpower, and being different was hers. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.